Inflation is bad. Prices keep going up on almost everything. This is so obvious because everyone's paying those prices. But on today's show, right here on Wealth Talks, we're going to talk about how you can fight back against inflation.
Cost of luxuries going up is one thing. You can do without luxuries. But when the cost of necessities goes up, everyone has to play along. I'm thinking about the price of groceries.
If the price to play a round of golf goes up, you can choose not to play. If the price of going on vacation goes up, you can choose not to go. If the price of cable TV goes up, you can choose to cut your cable. But if the cost of food goes up, you have to play along because you need to stay alive.
Grocery prices have gone up. Just since 2019, the cost of groceries has gone up 25%. It's one of the leading inflationary cost price increases. But it's not the biggest one. Transportation, fuel costs have gone up 27%.
And that cost of the transportation, the 27% increase, directly affects the cost of food at the grocery store because we have to transport all that food, not just from wherever it came from to the grocery store, but all the steps before that.
50 years ago, in 1974, you could get 2 pounds of hamburger for $1.49. They were pre-made patties. At our local Costco in 2024, you can get 2 pounds of hamburger for $8.38. So that's an increase in price of 5.6 times. But if you look at inflation over the same period of time, the price, $1 in 1974 would take $6.18 to buy the same amount of goods today. So hamburger has actually not kept up with inflation. The price of hamburger has gone down.
So why does it feel like that cost for hamburger is so much today is because wages have not kept up with inflation. And so when we look at wages, they've increased by 3 times since 1974. But looking at, example, my college tuition when I went to graduate school, if we look at the cost of what that has increased, it has increased 22 times since I went to school. How does 3 times wages keep up with 22 times of tuition cost?
It doesn't.
It can't. And that's where people start feeling the crunch, is because their wages have a gap between that and what the prices have increased by.
So hamburger has gone up in relation to what people were making, because 1974 making $25,000, 2024, the average person making $75,000. Yeah, only 3 times increase has not kept up with the price of hamburger, which has gone up 5.6 times.
Yeah.
And different things, that's the funny thing about inflation. It affects different things differently. Things that the government tends to get involved in, like education, healthcare, prices go up many times more than where things are deregulated.
Well, I remember Nelson Nash talking about in his seminar when his youngest daughter, who was born the same year I was, 1960, it cost $16 for his hotel room the night and $16 for the room for Mary, his wife, to have the baby in at the hospital.
So he was staying at the hotel room, $16 a night. His wife is staying in the hospital, $16 a night.
That's right.
How do hotel and hospital rooms compare now?
Well, an overnight stay at the average hospital across the United States is over $2,000 per night. You can get a hotel room for about $80 at the kind of hotel Nelson was staying in back in 1960. So
that's quite a difference.
But government has weaseled into healthcare so much with the Affordable Health Care Act, and before that, the HMO regulation that the Kennedys pushed through. It has driven the cost of healthcare up because of the regulation. And that's what happens every time government gets involved in anything, is prices go up.
We don't realize that when we see the prices of foods, but there's a lot of regulation about how food can be grown, and even some subsidy things that happen around food. Milk is subsidized and the prices are set. There's other kinds of crops that are subsidized. And now
corn and soybeans are very famous for being subsidized. It's one of the reasons that they use corn to produce ethanol that goes into fuels. And that's also one of the reasons that soybeans is used so heavily in many products that you buy at the store.
I remember back in 1979, I paid $375 to fly from Portland, Oregon to Tampa. Today, we just looked that up. That costs $200 and what was it, $89 or something like that.
And I think the one that was most comparable to that was still like $25 under that.
So what happened is Jimmy Carter deregulated the airline industry. So it forced prices down. It made prices be able to go down because regulations always drive prices up. We look at this with taxes on fuel. We look at this with taxes on corporations. Those corporations and the petroleum companies, they don't pay that tax. They pass it on to us. It's very important to realize that who we are putting into office and what their opinion is about how they're going to regulate this or regulate that is going to affect our bottom line.
I remember you talking about buying fuel in 1972, 1973 era. What were you paying per gallon?
Before I was 10, you could buy gasoline for 19 cents a gallon. But around 1972, when I was 12, we could get gas between 30 and 33 cents a gallon. And so on the way home from school, if I could pick up 3 pop bottles that were empty because people would discard them, there was a 10-cent refund on a glass pop bottle. Still is today. It's 10 cents on a glass pop bottle in the state of Oregon. And if I could pick up 3 of those on the way home, which I usually could, I had a gallon of gas that I could put in my go-kart. That's not going to happen now.
No. So if we take the $1 1974, take $6.18 today, that's about a 6.2 times increase. If we apply that to the cost of gasoline, we should be paying about $1.85 per gallon of gas today, but the average cost of gasoline is actually $3.31. This is another area where government has become involved in the regulation more so, and so the cost of gas has risen 11 times, and not just the 6.2 times that we see from inflation during this time frame.
And a lot of that is because of the state tax that's put on it and the federal tax that's on fuel. I know it was a big thing when we were in Nevada to get rid of that gasoline tax because it was really hurting commerce because people wouldn't travel. They couldn't afford to because of that extra tax. When, fuels was prices, gasoline was going over $4 a gallon. It was a real push to get rid of that gasoline tax.
Postage. There's another example. 10 cents for a first class stamp in 1974. Today, it's 68 cents. That's gone a little bit more than inflation. It's a 6.8 times increase instead of 6.2 times, which is comparable for inflation across the economy, the way that they measure it. But the value of the service, the reliability of the Postal Service seems to have gone down during that time.
Definitely, years ago, they used to deliver the mail twice a day. Well, in 1974, they weren't doing that. But it seems that we have a lot less dependability with the postal system. And that's kind of like some of the prices we see at the store where the price might be similar to what you were paying, but the size of the packaging has decreased. And that's kind of like what's happening with the postal system. Not only are you having inflation, paying higher prices, but the value of the service has gone down.
That's shrinkflation. That's another way that inflation manifests itself. Not always do prices go up for a package because sometimes the package gets smaller. You can still buy ice cream, but you can't necessarily buy as much.
Or you may have a combination. The price goes up and the package decreases.
Yes,
and
combination at the same
we
time.
have seen that with ice cream. Many years ago, it would be standard to buy a half gallon of ice cream. Mm-hmm. And we've seen many of the packages go to 1.5 quarts. And they just package it and increase the price and package it differently. At first, you're upset about it. Some people don't even notice it. But then after a while, you're just used to seeing that. And so it becomes the norm. And same with boxes of crackers or things. Sometimes the amount inside just decreases and they change the packaging a little bit.
Well, that happened with Hershey's candy bars in the 1950s. They decreased the size. And how did that come about?
Well, after the war effort, in World War II, the cost of chocolate went way up and cocoa and all that. And Hershey's was determined to keep their candy bar at 5 cents. And so to do that, they shrunk the candy bar. They changed the labeling so it was less expensive. And the rest is history. It's, today you go in and buy a Hershey's bar for $2, $2.50, and it may or may not be anywhere close to the size it was in 1950.
So they kept it smaller for a while, but then that also allows them to come back later and make it bigger. But of course, the price never goes down with it because the cost of producing it continues to go up.
So whether we're talking about just pure inflation or whether we're talking about shrinkflation, this is just causing us to have to spend more and more on the things that we need just to live. It's very important that we make sure that we're looking at the real cost of everything, not just the price of things. Because like my airline ticket, the cost has actually gone down. Hamburger has actually gone down. But how does that compare with what we're doing with our own finances? That's the real factor here. I know that sometimes people try to fight inflation by going to bulk stores and buying bigger quantities. And that may or may not be the best for their budget either. Because just because you can buy something and get it discounted at a bigger cost doesn't mean that it's going to last long enough for that large purchase to be cost effective.
I'm thinking too about the price of eggs. I was at a grocery store. It was around the time of the pandemic. So the price of eggs went up astronomically. They were saying, well, people are staying home and cooking eggs for breakfast now. And so they weren't able to meet all the demand. So the price increased. And the woman in front of me at the store, was getting like a 5 dozen and then a second 5 dozen. But she decided when she saw the price of the second amount she was getting, she said, oh no, I won't get those. And then she and the cashier were having a discussion about how they should maybe purchase chickens and have them in their yard so they could get eggs without such high prices at the grocery store. And I was close enough to the conversation that I felt like I needed to go ahead and say something because our son was raising chickens in our backyard. So I had to tell them, well, the price of chicken feed has doubled. And they both were, oh. They hadn't thought about the back end. The price of chicken feed had also gone up. So of course the price of eggs has to go up. The price of gasoline has gone up. So of course the price of chicken feed and of eggs has to go up.
Yeah. It's not always the greedy farmers or the greedy corporations. Their prices are going up too. So they have to pass that cost increase
Right.
on.
So it's the seen, but also the unseen that has to be accounted for.
The other regulation that went in with that is the store started saying you can only buy this many dozen eggs. So that happens when prices get so expensive. There's a scarcity mentality that happens, and governments in the past have been known to ration how much you can buy of something. It's another way that government controls us, not only through inflation, but also because of inflation, they can start rationing things.
After the break, we're going to talk about how to beat inflation. But first, this message from today's show sponsor, McPhee Insurance.
The policy that works best for the infinite banking concept is a dividend-paying whole life insurance policy with a paid-up additions rider. You'll want this policy to be structured to allow the maximum cash value accumulation without creating unnecessary tax consequences or inhibiting the cash value growth for future policy years. At McPhee Insurance, we specialize in these types of policies. We are licensed in all 50 states, so no matter where you're located in the U.S., we can help you. Call our office at 702-660-7000 or email us, team@mcpheeinsurance.com.
How can we fight back against inflation?
One of the ways is that we can increase income, increase productivity.
Another way is we have to have a positive mindset because if we're going to fight inflation, we got to go into the fight prepared to win. We have to adjust our attitudes and adjust our game plan for how we can fight it.
That's true, because a negative mindset does not allow creativity. A victim mindset's not going to help you here.
And this is true whether you're fighting inflation, whether you're going in to bake a cake, you have to go in with the idea that you can bake this cake. If you're going to go out and plant a garden, you plant the garden for success. Anything we do in life, we have to look at how can we win this?
So what you said, John, about increasing our income is absolutely true. We have to increase our income if we're going to keep up with inflation because prices are going up. So that means we either have to work longer or we have to be more creative to work more productively. And so that positive mindset is so important because a negative mindset kills or destroys any creativity we might have.
Yeah, and we want to have a balanced, realistic mindset because we don't want to be impossibly optimistic nor discouragingly negative. There is a balance there, and we want it to be in the positive direction. because that'll help us much more than the negative direction. You can take those two extremes and try to put them together, but just having two extremes is not going to help you. It has to be balanced.
Well, positive thinking won't help us do anything, but positive thinking will help us do what we have to do better than negative thinking will. And so it's important that we get a positive mindset. And the way that we do that is we have to be realistic. Yeah, this is happening. We have to know our enemy. We have to know the thief is here and present in the room. But we also have to say, we don't have to be subject to the things that they're trying to impose upon us. And one of those ways is to become more productive, to be more creative, to maybe even take a second job sometimes, or to sit down and reevaluate, what are my needs and what are my wants? What are my luxuries in my life, and what are the things that I could be just as happy without?
So I feel very practical. I always often come back to the kitchen because we've talked a lot about food prices today too. And when we're considering what we're going to fix for dinner, maybe steak would be our first choice. And steak once in a while is fine. But we also have to think about what other things that we're willing to have and be satisfied with, and not just, I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and a lot of conversation about inflation and prices and hearing a lot of women talking about just putting together casseroles, just stirring them together, and then you eat out of the pot and what you get is what you get. In my mind, that was unpleasant. And I think that you can use a lot of creativity in the kitchen and cook inexpensively, but not necessarily just have to have a one pot casserole type, here's what you get. Now, if you like that, that's great. Have that. But if that's not what you like, think about how you can arrange what you can have to be more satisfying and yet be economical on the pocketbook.
That's a great example of not allowing a mindset to limit you as to what you can do, because you could still cook inexpensively, very creatively in the kitchen, and you make wonderful meals.
I think about someone who was told that they need to lose weight, and their doctor said they could eat anything they wanted. And then he gave them a list of everything they would want. When we define what it is that we can certainly have, then we can work around that. And we have to do that in all areas of life. So we can't just decide we're going to go on a vacation to everywhere. We have to pick and choose. I'm going to go on this vacation now. I'm going to enjoy this part of this vacation, and then save our other desires for another time.
I remember during the 2008 recession that I read an article about how chefs were learning how to prepare inexpensive cuts of meat for exquisite restaurants, and how they would take a pot roast and cook it differently so that it was a desirable menu item for people that normally would have eaten steak. That's the creativity that comes when hard times happen if we keep a positive attitude. I think of the children of Israel when they were going to enter the promised land, and the spies came back and 10 of them says, "Oh, there's giants in the land. We can never conquer this." Well, we've got a giant in the room right now. It's called inflation and regulation and shrinkflation. It's killing a lot of people because we're focusing too much on that. And those people that grumbled, they never did enter into the promised land. They never got to benefit from all the huge produce that was in there and the abundance that the promised land had. And if we keep a negative attitude, then we won't be able to see the benefits that can come from inflation and shrinkflation.
Yeah. During times of inflation like this, it's important that as we're looking for ways to increase our income, it's just not, you go get a career and then you go on autopilot. It forces us, it's an incentive, if you will, to become more productive and more efficient with the time that God has given us. So increasing our income, increasing our productivity, super important, balancing our income and spending, keeping that in order. And then finally, we got to think about how efficient we're being with our savings. We can't just put that away in a bank and go on autopilot with our savings anymore. We need to think about ways to make our savings more efficient. And one of those ways is by saving in places that we can still access our money. So many people save in plans that lock their money away for most of their life. They're not able to get to it, and they're going to feel the full force of inflation.
Well, even if you buy gold and hoard it away someplace, the Bible tells us that moth and rust will corrupt and thieves will break in and steal. And that's happening right now. So running to precious metals and hoping to store our wealth there, you can't trade in precious metals. You have to go to the store and you have to have a common commodity that people are willing to accept. And it's really hard to go and lay a bar of gold on the table to buy your eggs. We need to take care of the medium of exchange that we live in, and that's the US dollar. And the best place to store that dollar so that we can velocitize the use of it, like a bank does, is participating whole life insurance.
We like participating whole life insurance as a financial tool because it gives us a nice steady growth on our savings. So it's not just sitting in the bank earning hardly anything for so many years. And even when banks do pay a little bit more in interest, we know that's not going to be long-term historically. But we know that our return in a life insurance policy is going to be long-term historically. So that gives us an edge on our savings. We're also get a death benefit for it. But then the big thing, we don't lose access to that money. We still get that rate of return in the life insurance if we decide we want to borrow, take a policy loan against the life insurance cash value that we've built up and use it for something else in our life. So maybe we buy a tool that helps us to increase our income and become more productive. And then we pay that back over time with our savings program so that we don't feel the effects of inflation as much, because now that tool helps us to be more productive, or the investment that we made. Maybe it's an experience for our family, something that creates wealth today. And we're paying those dollars back with dollars that we have earned now as inflation has taken a bigger and bigger toll. We're paying our premium with dollars that are not worth as much as when we first purchased the policy. And yet, as that policy gets older, the cash value grows better with every premium we pay.
Well, I was just talking to a client the other day about paying a $4,800 premium on his policy that's 13, 14 years old. When he pays that premium, he gets $7,600 back that he can use in the policy.
And he paid how much?
48 to 76. That's a 58% difference.
That's
so
wonderful.
That's a huge way to fight back against inflation. But it's because he planned this 13 years ago that this was going to start happening. I was talking to another young fellow the other day that in this time in his life, he went from owning his own business and being very productive in that business to taking a job. And he saw how much time was wasted on the job site by his fellow employees. But he was saying, this really has shown me that when I get back in business for myself, how much more efficient I could have used my time and will use my time, because I can be so much more productive seeing how much time has been wasted. So everything that happens to us, we can either look at the negative, oh, all these people are wasting time, or we can say, that's going to trigger me to do something even better. And it's the same thing with inflation or shrinkflation. We have the power to change. God made us creative in His image, and we can be creative if we don't get bogged down with negative thinking.
Life insurance is a wonderful tool that helps us to be able to do that.
Inflation is like an invisible thief. If you put your cash in a safe, you lock it up, put a camera on it, and watch it real safely, make sure no one gets into it. 20 years, you open the safe back up, and you go out and try to spend that money, it's not going to buy what it could have bought 20 years ago.
It is good to protect yourself from inflation in every way you can. The Bible tells us that if the man of the house knew the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not allowed the thief to enter his house. We know the thief is here. It is our duty to protect our financial house in every way we can.
Do these things to fight back against inflation, and come back next week because we're going to be talking about retirement savings, IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, pensions, and annuities, right here on Wealth Talks.